Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. God made the world. The book of Genesis makes that perfectly clear. But sometimes it's easy to forget that fact and to view God as some distant deity who's out of touch with a world that seems to be increasingly out of his control. But Isaiah would have us realize that God still rules over all that exists, and his sovereignty extends to the ends of the earth. And in Isaiah chapter 18, verses 1 through 7, we'll see God deliver another oracle, this time against the nation of Cush. While we know little about this kingdom, we do know that to the average Hebrew in Isaiah's day, it represented the ends of the earth. It was a relatively unknown land that remained a mystery to the people of Judah. Yet God has plans for Cush. In fact, he has plans for all the nations of the earth, past, present, and future. As the people of Judah faced the prospect of God's pending judgment, they were looking for someone to step in and rescue them. And they weren't that picky when it came to potential rescuers. So God makes it clear that the nations to whom they might turn would prove less than satisfactory saviors, because God has judgment in store for them as well. Cush isn't exactly a household name for most of us. If asked to locate it on a world map, we might not know what region of the globe to begin our search. But because this next oracle is directed at the land of Cush, and all of the preceding oracles have been connections with nations who had direct ties to the people of Judah, we can assume Cush was in close proximity to the Promised Land. In the book of Genesis, we have the record of God's destruction of the world through a global flood. Noah and his family, including his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, were the only ones to survive God's judgment on the world. According to Genesis 10:6, Ham became the father of Cush. One of the sons born to Cush was a man named Nimrod. Interestingly, the Genesis account only provides a history of this one son of Cush. Cush was the father of Nimrod. He began to be a valiant warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the land. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The primary regions of his kingdom were Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and Rezin, which is between Nineveh and the great city of Calah. Genesis 10, verses 8 through 12. There are some names that should jump out at us in this passage: Babel, Shinar, Assyria, and Nineveh. Of course, Babel is where mankind attempted to disobey God's command to spread across the earth and repopulate it. Instead, they decided to erect a tower that would reach to the heavens. In reality, they were trying to build their own reputation as a great and mighty people, but God confused their languages and they dispersed. But Babel would later become the region known as Babylon. Many scholars believe Shinar to be a reference to the land of Sumer, where the Sumerians lived. This region was located in southern Mesopotamia in what is now southern Iraq. The Sumerians eventually built the city of Ur, which was the hometown of Abraham. Of course, Assyria is more familiar to most of us. It was a great nation that occupied an area that included what is now Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. Their capital city was Nineveh. So we can see that the descendants of Cush have a long and less than friendly history with the people of God. But in Isaiah's day, the Cushites resided in the area south of Egypt. Some believe that they were actually Ethiopians. Isaiah describes them as a nation tall and smooth, a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. Isaiah 18, verse 2. The first-century Jewish historian Josephus records, "For of the 4 sons of Ham, time has not at all hurt the name of Cush, for the Ethiopians over whom he reigned are even at this day, both by themselves and by all men in Asia, called Cushites." Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews. In Isaiah's day, the land of Cush would have been considered the end of the world. It was about as far from the land of Judah as one could imagine. And yet, God directs Isaiah to deliver an oracle against this distant nation. Why? Because Judah, facing the prospect of an attack by a combined force made up of Syrians and Israelites, was considering forming its own alliance. In other words, they were looking for aid in their moment of desperation. And the Cushites, along with the Egyptians, would have been logical options for the people of Judah to consider. But God has a warning for the people of Cush. In fact, his oracle includes all the nations of the earth. All you inhabitants of the world, you who dwell on the earth. Isaiah 18:3. Rather than using the Cushites to save the people of Judah, God commissions them to take a message to the nations of the earth. He wants them to warn these nations that judgment is coming. When a signal is raised on the mountains, look. When a trumpet is blown, hear. Isaiah 18, verse 3. There will be a signal for battle, and no one will miss it. When that day comes, the nations are to take notice and prepare for the worst. And God warns, I will quietly look for my dwelling, like clear heat and sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. Isaiah 18, verse 4. There will be no panic on God's part. There's almost a feeling of nonchalance in this statement, as if God simply looks down and knows it's time to act. And the next verse describes the actions of a farmer pruning his crops. For before the harvest, when the blossom is over and the flower becomes a ripening grape, he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks, and the spreading branches he lops off and clears away. Isaiah 18, verse 5. But God's pruning of the nations would appear premature, before they had time to fully produce fruit. In a sense, he would nip in the bud their plans for world domination. He would prune the fruit of their conquests and their desires for global subjugation. And the results of God's judgment will be devastating. They will all be left for the birds of the hills and the wild animals. The birds will eat them during the summer, and all the wild animals will eat them during the winter. Isaiah 18, verse 6. The book of Revelation speaks of a coming day of judgment that is eerily similar in tone. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and with a loud voice he called to all the birds that fly directly overhead, Come, gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all men, both free and slave, both small and great. Revelation 19, verses 17 through 18. There is a coming day of judgment for all mankind. God will deal righteously and justly with the rebellious nations once and for all time. He will bring an end to sin. He will destroy the pride and arrogance of man, revealing himself as the one and only God of the universe. And later on in this book, Isaiah reveals something else that God will do in that day. It will be an act of mercy and grace. It will be a sign of God's love and his desire to redeem a remnant from throughout the nations. For I know their works and their thoughts, and the time is coming to gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and shall see my glory, and I will set a sign among them. And from them I will send survivors to the nations, to Tarshish, Pul, and Lud, who draw the bow, to Tabal and Javan, to the coastlands far away, that have not heard my fame or seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the nations. Isaiah 66, verses 18 through 19. They shall declare my glory among the nations. God will send his people to the far ends of the earth, even beyond the borders of Cush, in order that all people might hear of his glory, goodness, and grace.